Hello and welcome. Pauline, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I was on mute. Thank you, Sweyn. I'm saying hello and welcome to Dr. Tech Show on YouTube and Tech Talk on Hope Radio, where myself, Pauline, Roche, and Sweyn Hunter and occasional guests guide you through the world of online communications in a show where we talk tech, the brainchild of the late John Popham. And in traditional fashion, we start with how's the weather where you are? So Sweyn, how's the weather where you are?
It's blustery. It's typical early winter in Orkney. There's blue sky in the distance. It's always in the distance, and there's grey skies overhead and lots of rain. But it's blustery and fairly fresh, so that's good.
Okay, good to hear. And in Birmingham, it was not raining enough to go out for a walk this morning, which was nice, and see the birds being fed in the park. We always think they're having conversations about get out of the way, Reg. I saw that piece of bread first. So there's plenty of seagulls and other flying animals in the air, having a great time in our park. And Neil, welcome to our special guest this morning, Neil Lawrence.
Thank you.
How's the weather where you are, and where are you?
I'm in Oxford, and like everything about Oxford, it's dull and boring, but that's probably because I'm moving soon.
Where are you moving to?
I'm moving down to Dorset to be with my new council.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll come back to you in a few minutes, Neil, but please stay on the line and we'll go through the usual other things that we go through. And the first thing is to remark that today is St. Andrew's Day, which is the official national day of Scotland. And it's been also a national holiday in Romania since 2015, which I didn't know before. St. Andrew is the patron saint of Cyprus, Scotland, Greece, Romania, Russia, Ukraine, Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, St. Andrew's Island in Colombia, St. Andrew in Barbados, and Tenerife. And in Scotland and many countries with Scottish connections, St. Andrew's Day is marked with a celebration of Scottish culture with traditional Scottish food and music. And it's also seen as the start of a season of Scottish winter festivals encompassing St. Andrew's Day, Hogmanay, and Burns Night. And one thing we picked up about St. Andrew's Day for today is that there's a new festival, the Frontline Festival Scotland, a new virtual gig supported by over 30 Scottish artists. And that's going to be live streamed over social media from 12 o'clock today. So they're starting at the same time as we are, 12 noon to 10 p.m., with the aim of raising funds for 4 of Scotland's frontline charities. That is Scotland's Charity Air Ambulance, Scottish Police Benevolent Fund, Scottish Fire and Rescue Family Support Trust, and Scottish Ambulance Service Endowment Fund. And this virtual gig is going to be streamed over Facebook Live, YouTube, and Just Giving, where organisers hope to reach out to all the Scottish diaspora around the globe. So that sounds fairly exciting. Sweyn, what do you think? Are you going to be tuning into any of that today?
I think I'll certainly be tuning in later on. Yes, for sure.
Well, they seem to have an excellent lineup. Finishing off at the end, I noticed with Wet, 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 which I don't know is a commentary on the weather or just a nice thing to end with. But it's and some interviews as well. It looks really good. So
I'm intrigued to see the Bay City Rollers are on the list.
I noticed that. Yes, I was a big fan in the day.
And also Altered Images, which I think was Claire Grogan's group.
You probably know people who are involved with that, Sweyn, at some level.
Possibly, I don't know.
Okay, and other things that are happening or starting today or around today. The BCS, the British Computer Society, is having its first ever virtual festival of digital skills. With dedicated streams for schools, educators, authorities, industry and individuals, including a networking lounge and exhibition where you can live chat to experts. And there are opportunities to get involved in debate and analysis with policymakers, business professionals, educators and specialists who are steering the digital agenda. And they're promising insight into latest thinking from the experts on the UK's digital landscape, including bespoke sessions from leaders in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and how to adapt and equip yourself and your organisation in the face of accelerating technology change. So I think that's really interesting looking. And on the screen now, Sweyn's just running through some of the today's and tomorrow's and the next day's activities. I think there's a great lineup. Their emphasis is on the economy, not so much the community, but the economic road ahead is their theme. So they've got sessions for schools, local authorities, HR professionals, colleges and training providers, employers and individuals. And I registered for it because I'm hoping that they'll be make the sessions, leave them online for people to catch up with later on. Did you see anything, Sweyn, that caught your eye that you might be interested in?
There's lots, not so later in the week for me, but yes, there's one or two things I definitely will be trying to get along to. You're going to ask me what they are now, and I've forgotten, but yes, it looks an excellent program.
Yeah, good. We'll come back to that. And then the final thing that we're marking around this time is from the 2nd to the 7th of December, with December starting tomorrow, as everybody knows, is National Grief Awareness Week. And their campaign message this week, which John Popham would have been very keen on, I think, is share your story. The hashtag is share your story. And this annual national event is driven by the Good Grief Trust, which is the UK's leading umbrella charity, bringing together all UK bereavement services, support organisations and helplines into one central database. And they're offering early signposting to a choice of support for both the bereaved and those working with them. And obviously people can't meet up now as they used to in the present times, but they're pointing out that telling your story could become someone's hope, and they recognise that many have not been able to share their stories of grief this year, and that people who are bereaved and sad have often felt alone and isolated during the COVID-19 crisis. And sharing our stories can help those grieving to know that the person who has died will be remembered, can help the bereaved process their grief. They emphasise that sharing stories will help others to understand the impact of grief and loss, and will enable conversations to take place to open up to emotions and feelings that are often difficult to express. So I think that's got a lot to offer us. Even if, we haven't been immediately bereaved, it's just sad at the moment. And especially with Christmas coming up and other festivals, it's hard. It's hard for everybody. So it's good to acknowledge that and be able to talk about it. Okay, so that's our markings for this week, and we are delighted to welcome our special guest for today, who's Neil Lawrence. And Neil, I'm afraid what I tend to do in these circumstances is raid person's LinkedIn. So I raided your LinkedIn, and I'm introducing you as the web manager and product owner responsible for the ongoing development and improvement of the website in Dorset Council, and user experience of digital services. And you're managing a team of content designers and a web assistant. And you were previously a program manager for transformation at Oxford City Council. And I'd like to quote something that somebody who worked with you said about you, which I think is really apposite. His enthusiasm for all things digital is without bounds, and this can be seen in the blog he writes as a record of his team's achievements, and his very active participation and lead in discussions online with councils around the country, where his opinion is often sought by his peers.
Wow, that sounds good.
Welcome, Neil Lawrence.
I can't remember how much that cost me to buy that, but it sounds like it was money well spent.
So how are you, Neil? And
I'm good.
What are you up to at the moment?
I'm in week 7 of my new role in Dorset, so I'm currently still getting to grips with things here. You mentioned our website. One of the big things that's happening for us this year is we're going into bed with a fabulous supplier called Playbook, and moving a lot of what we do onto their platform. So there's an awful lot of running around at the moment because we're trying to move the main website over by next May, which is challenging to say the least. So we've got a few things we're wrestling with, along with the normal issues of wrestling with accessibility and some governance things too. So there's plenty for me to do here. Let's put it that way.
Good. And we'd like to hear, Neil, from our guests about their kind of how they got involved in like being a digital person online. So what's your early kind of career looking like, and how did it bring you to this place?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because people do find odd ways into digital, don't they? And I've been really struck by looking at backgrounds of people online that I know, my sort of peers around the country. So I guess, like many of them, I just sort of stumbled into it by accident, really. I've always had a bit of a passion for the web, and I think my earliest play with that was in building a website for a racing team that my friend used to run around with. So I built that from using some tools that probably aren't around anymore that I can't even remember the name of, but that was great fun. And I also took photographs for the site and knew all the drivers, so it was a really good experience, but it wasn't ever part of my day job. it sort of came that way more as I went through my career at Oxford, because I was kind of doing performance and change stuff. And there was a need for a new intranet, and someone said, well, you can project manage that. And that sounded like a good idea, sounded like good fun. But I thought I might as well get something out of this and actually learn this stuff rather than just do it, rather than just say to other people, you do it. So I sat in all the training. So in a sense, I got developed in developing a little bit in using WordPress. Sorry, not WordPress, Drupal back then. That's since. So yes, so I'm a kind of a site builder level Drupal person. Then that took me into finding out more about the tech community in Oxford. So I'm a very proud member of the Drupal user group Oxford, who are a lovely bunch of people, and I shall miss them dreadfully when we move. From there, I started working with the main website at Oxford and transitioning that over in a project. And I guess it's fair to say they kind of built a role around me. So that bloke there, he did our intranet, and now he's done our website. We may as well give him a couple of members of staff and say off you go, which is pretty much what happened. So that's kind of how I stumbled into it. But I think the saving grace for me, and you'll know this, Pauline, is the amazing people that take part in local gov digital. It's fair to say I knew nothing when I started, and now I know a little more thanks to the fabulous help that I get from my peers around the country. And I'm a passionate advocate of collaboration and everyone working together through that platform, because it really makes a difference.
Yeah, I know you are, Neil, and it's one of the things I really have enjoyed. Well, I've met you on the circuit. If you look at the back of my door over there, you'll see the local gov digital, one of those bags hanging on.
Well, if we're showing off, I've still got my water bottle.
Excellent. They do good merchandise. Shout out for Nick and David and the crew. And they did a great event this year. We were able to be part of it. I went to a couple of sessions. I think Sweyn did as well. Yeah, I mean, those kind of collaborative events, they just offer so much opportunity for us to catch up with each other and learn from each other. And I think it is those people who attend events like that who I feel most hopeful about in this world, because there's a mindset of collaboration and openness that really makes a difference. And again, that refers back to the founder of this show, John Popham, who was all about sharing and collaboration and openness and kind of live streaming. I don't know if you ever met John and Neil. I
think I met him once. So, but obviously it's had a huge impact, his passing on people that I know. And I feel a bit jealous in a way that I didn't get to know him anywhere near as well as that, because obviously he was a very fabulous person. He did some really important work.
Yeah.
It certainly helped me a lot from my sort of geographically peripheral position to be connected to some of these events that you're talking about, because without somebody like John to advocate and even just turn up and do a bit of live streaming here and there, those of us who are out with the normal geographical parameters, you might find this slightly in Dorset. I don't know, that's possibly slightly more out of the way than Oxford, slightly more difficult to get around, and that's really all the way I knew him was only through live streaming. I never actually met him in person, although I had lots of good chats and good exchanges with him, and he's given me so many good ideas over the years. That he really is a big miss.
I guess the rest of the sector has kind of caught up with that thinking now, hasn't it? We've all been pushed into a scenario where we have to work this way because we can't get together in a room, so we need to make things more accessible. So along with the many downsides of what COVID's brought us, I do think that shift in access to tech, more working from home, but the ability for people to join in with remote events is fantastic. So my daughter's registered disabled, and so I've always known that getting to places is fine if you can and you've got the money and you're not too far away, and it's kind of destroyed that London-centric feel for what gets done. So
in Scotland, Glasgow-centric.
Really? Okay.
We joke that collaboration in Scotland used to depend entirely on being able to drive for 90 or fewer minutes to a room where everybody else is going to meet.
Yeah.
Which is crazy when you think about it now.
Yeah.
Well, our focus here on the Dr. Tech Show really is with those who are trying to get connected for the first time during COVID restrictions, and also those who might be trying to help them to do so. And I mean, you're heavily involved in sort of transformation within a local government context. I just wondered how you see how that links in with some of the digital inclusion work that's going on around the country as well, and how those two things can kind of feed off each other.
So I think it's fair to say before I went for the interview at Dorset, I didn't know enough about them, but that prompted me to do some reading. And the more I read, the more I was fascinated and excited by what's going on down there, partly because of their approach to digital. It not only matches what we'd expect from a good digital council, but because they haven't left people behind. So along with, there's two main themes to what Dorset wants to do on digital. One is become a digital council, which is all the good internal stuff and the way we work and agile. But the second is enable Dorset to be a digital place. And why that's so important is that Dorset is very rural. Its connectivity is not great, both from a transport point of view, but also from a digital infrastructure point of view. So it's determined not to leave people behind. So it's got a dedicated team of people that are looking at that. It's also prompted some really involvement in some really interesting projects like 5G. So the team there are doing some really exciting work. I wish I was more involved in that, to be honest.
I'm in the same boat. Orkney's one of the test sites as well, and I wish I was more involved with that too. But
yeah. But there's a lot of enthusiasm for it, and it does seem to solve a problem. But it doesn't feel like that people are being left behind in this great push. I mean, I get nervous when I hear people say channel shift sometimes. Well, always, actually, every time. And it's because sometimes it feels like channel push. And if people aren't available or it's not possible for them to do that, then we effectively alienate a big chunk of people. And I don't feel that that's happening here, which is why I'm a passionate flag waver for Dorset at the moment, because it feels like it's doing everything right.
That's really good to hear. Yeah, it certainly echoes kind of themes we have on the show about not leaving anybody behind. We've covered stories where those who are talking about other people talking about digital inclusion have emphasized the need for other channels as well as digital, just to make sure that people don't get left behind. I mean, we hope eventually everybody has enough equipment and connectivity and data to be able to connect if they want to, but some people will never want to the same way we do. So they have to be thought about as well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that it's thrown up that's I think has been quite exciting for me as a lifer in local government is the role of the third sector, because it's very easy to say no, we'll take charge of that as a local council. We'll do all this, and I think COVID has just thrown that into the air as well. So it happened at Oxford. We worked very closely with a charity called Oxford Together, and it was fascinating when I moved to Dorset to see exactly the same thing had happened in Dorset with an organisation called Help and Kindness. So a big shout out to John Sloper of Help and Kindness, who does awesome work and is helping us at the moment with how we help get people access to food. So that we've kind of given that role or the information around that to a third sector organisation rather than it being part of a council website. Saves me a job as well, which is kind of handy. But he does it better, I think. And you've got that trust element and lots of different channels in that I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, I work for local authorities as well, and I think it is important that there are routes to assistance and help, especially at the moment, which don't rely on a particularly good relationship with the council so far. Obviously, we'd all want to improve our relationships with everybody, but with the best will in the world, there are people who need help, but who don't really see the council as an ally, unfortunately, and they need alternative routes to that help too.
Yeah, so the experience in Oxford was, sorry, Pauline, I talked right over you there.
Carry on, Neil.
So one of the things that I think was another positive coming out of this was how it, certainly in Oxford, how it changed how people thought of the council within the community. I thought they probably thought we just sat in offices and did stuff, but then if you're turning up at people's doors with a parcel of food, then suddenly that relationship changes. So I think it did a lot of positive stuff too.
Right. Yeah,
amazing. I can't imagine. I don't know that that's happened in Birmingham. I haven't heard that it has happened, but I know that the council and the third sector, has been working closely together to enable provision and enable, new services to take off. And you can get everything online in now, like food, exercises, health. They've all kind of stepped up to the mark, really. I mean, I would like to see more development in the sector, in the third sector. You know, Neil, I'm always banging on about this, but you know, for me, the sector, especially the smaller charities, haven't been invested in the way bigger charities and public sector has had the investment. And to me, it's amazing that they still manage to do such brilliant work with a lack of, of investment. Can you imagine what it would be like if the investment had been made, years ago? But now is a good time to start if it wasn't done 10 years ago. And I've been talking about this at events and kind of here as well. And the Small Charities Coalition, of where I'm a trustee, is kind of on the case as well. And I think all charities are working towards making it easier and more accessible for people. But there's still charities who are using kind of older equipment, have less connectivity. They can't have devices for all their staff and stuff. And I think that that needs to be given attention to. The government needs to be paying attention to that, kind of, because this is not going to be resolved in 12 months even. I think it's optimism, but we need to think this is for the long haul, and we need to address that.
From the other perspective, from as well, charities, third sectors, businesses, it can sometimes be difficult for them to find an electronic digital way to interact with the public sector due to various restrictions and focuses that the public sector tends to have. And I think there's a bit of work needs to be done there too, not only in us in the public sector, as it were, connecting with individuals, which I think we do reasonably well, but also trying to make sure that we use the tools and the techniques and the approaches which third sector organizations tend to use, which are quite distinct from some of the things that public sector organizations use. To take the most obvious example, I think most public sector organizations probably rely for interactions like this on Microsoft Teams. And I think most charities, third sector and small business environments tend not to use that at all and to rely on Zoom or Google. And there really does need to be more done to enable public sector people to be where those users are, sort of thing, in the Zoom space, in the Google space and the rest of it, because it's just a completely needless barrier, in my view, to collaboration otherwise. And yes, there might well be restrictions, there might well be issues to be worked through and so on, but it gets, as each month and each year goes by, it gets increasingly frustrating that we are endlessly arguing over that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer to that is, Sweyn, because obviously just within councils there's a whole realm of approaches to how people deal with it. So if you took council meetings and broadcasting them, that needed to be stood up in a very, very short amount of time, and I think it rapidly turned into two camps.
Yes.
People who use Zoom and people who use Teams, and then added something else on to make it more accessible generally. It's probably
I have no view. I think each can do that perfectly well and perfectly adequately. It's less the kind of broadcasting stuff. It's the kind of interaction and collaboration spaces that I think needs a bit of attention.
So there's some interesting.
In Scotland, we've got the digital office for local government, which is a joint venture between all of the councils here, and that's the obvious place to try and make some progress there. And I think we are gradually, with higher level meetings between security people on our side and security people in Zoom and other organizations, to try and get a common set of issues that can then be sorted out as to why some things aren't used at the moment.
There is some work going on that's been funded by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, MHCLG. I was in just before I left. I was involved in a project that did get funding, but it hadn't started by the time I left, and that was around a playbook for engaging with communities. I think there's a separate project on digital engagement that may have just reported actually, but that was arising from COVID. That was part of the special COVID funding that MHCLG put together. So I'm really interested to dig into those and see what's come out of that, because I think that would be starting to address some of those issues. But it is more about engaging directly with communities rather than via third sector.
I think that there's a distinction to be made between interacting between individuals and the public sector, like the citizen, if you like, and third sector and private sector partners and the public sector. I think those are two different problems, and I think sometimes we tend to kind of lump them together and forget about the difference.
It's interesting you refer to Playbook, Neil, because we had a guest on, two guests on a couple of months ago now, Chris Ashworth and Ross McCullough, from talking about the Reboot project, which is, to try and get people to bring devices they're not using into, use by other people. And we've had a guest on more recently, Rachel Connell, is talking about wanting businesses to, offer devices to local people in her area. So there's a lot of activity in that kind of sphere. Are you seeing much of that where you are?
I'm not really involved in the boxes and wires aspect of stuff, so I'm generally in how we meet user needs with content in my current role. I know that was looked into when I was at Oxford, because we were upgrading to Windows 10 machines and had an awful lot of machines that were coming back in. I'm sure that conversation was had, but again, those same issues dictate what platform you use in terms of Zoom or Teams. The security people get involved in that, and they will start to have their say. And I think sometimes those conversations tend to dominate a little. It's a shame, but that tends to be, security and confidentiality are completely worthy things, but they sometimes dictate our approach to things. I don't know how many things have been stopped in previous working lives because people say, "Oh, GDPR," and all of a sudden everything crashes to a halt. That does frustrate me, and I think it's more out of fear than it is out of looking at need and addressing it in the easiest way.
I think one of the key skills in digital in the public sector is to be able to take that sort of argument on and actually make progress with it. And it comes from understanding where the concerns come from and kind of taking that seriously, but not, as you say, allowing it to overwhelm any other perspective or any other factor.
Well, it's interesting. I've just been in 3 meetings this morning talking about another one of my passions, which is accessibility, and how it hasn't had the same level of interest or attention or importance as, say, GDPR or even safeguarding. And you can completely understand the safeguarding one. The GDPR is usually born out of fear of being sued or things costing money. But the message I'm trying to sort of raise locally is that if we don't make things more accessible, forget the rules. I'm really not particularly interested in them. It's more that we're creating barriers for people to actually access the things that we're building for them, the content we're writing, and the services that we're putting out there. So if people can't use them, then you're losing part of your audience. And one of the stats I always like throwing into that debate is the number of people with color blindness is massive. And it's such a simple thing, but it's completely disregarded by most normal people. But it has implications way beyond the web into normal everyday life. So you could take parking meter machines in Oxford that just have a red and green button with no markings on them and say, what were you thinking? But it isn't done out of malice. It's done out of I just didn't think.
Yeah. I think it's been interesting for me how the COVID restrictions, that's not directly relevant to the parking meters, but how the COVID restrictions have brought certain issues into fairly fundamental relief, as we're all unable, or it's more difficult for all of us to travel around the countryside.
Absolutely.
We're all seeing it from the position of restriction and lack of accessibility, and I'm hoping that we can cling on to some of the new insights and the new ways of working once we eventually get back to normal.
And I think it's got some positive knock-ons for the democracy. I know I mentioned council meetings, but there were a few councils doing it, and Oxford did the major meetings, but didn't really bother with the others. I think when you look at the research and what people are actually doing online, so they're dropping in for a session they're interested in, because they no longer have to give up their evening to go into a place on the bus that could actually be miles away just to hear 5 minutes of conversation. So now we're making it
that people know what's coming up, because
yes,
And okay, so maybe there are only the usual 2 journalists and 3 others listening to most items. But if there is something that's controversial, there's no fuss about it being accessible. It's just
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
But I think that's one area where there's a decision sort of going on now, and you can see people talking about it. This is actually kind of good. Why would we go back to the old way? We should just do this. And I think there's a lot of that going on, particularly around working patterns as well. Why would we drag people in?
Yeah.
I mean, it's particularly useful for me. I'm still stuck in Oxford while working for Dorset. No one's saying you've got to be at Dorchester, county hall every day, because I'd really struggle with a 120-mile drive.
Yeah.
So it just makes the whole issue of recruitment. I've just appointed a content designer for a year. I started last week. She's living in Swindon, so she's never going to be in the office. We'll never see her face to face. She's actually nearer to me now than she would be in Dorset.
It's going to be interesting to see how that sort of plays out over the next few years.
I think they're also bringing out the accessibility things too, because
both companies and individuals. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the number of things I've come across that require me to have a printer to print something else, sign it, and I don't have a printer, so I'm making a bit of a nuisance of myself, saying I don't have a printer. You need to do something else for me. And I think when you look at accessibility issues, I've been objecting to some things that I've seen, and colleagues that are disabled said, I'm so used to it, I just didn't take any notice of it anymore. And I think we browbeat people down into accepting bad service sometimes, and we need to be the advocates for them.
Absolutely. That's great. I'm cheering you on, Neil. That's great. So Dorset had a digital festival recently, didn't it? I don't know if you were involved with that in any way.
Was I involved? Blimey. That was my first week, Pauline. That was my induction week, which is on these 3 days, we're going to have 61 sessions. And we've had something like 5,000 people sign up for sessions. So yeah, I wasn't involved in putting it together. So a lot of very hardworking people put the time and the hours in for that. But it was great to be part of that and see what's possible. I did manage to recruit a couple of my favorites in. So we did get Mark Thompson doing his fabulous session on big digital picture.
Excellent. He's brilliant.
It was great. His talk was entitled Heart FM, where we should be more like Heart FM, and he never mentioned Heart FM. He just talked so much he missed the whole thing. And then I don't know if you've come across Sam Villis doing her piece on storytelling, which is great. I love Sam to bits, and she just wowed people again on that. So those were my 2 picks, and I was really pleased they could both make it.
I heard Mark at a local Gov camp a couple of years ago in Birmingham. You may have been there. He was brilliant. He's so
Did you shout bingo, Pauline?
I don't think I did. But it was fascinating, and to see people in a local Gov crowd enthusiastic about open data win. Really good. We need more people like that.
Absolutely.
So what were some of the other highlights for you for that festival? Or did some things go wrong? We always like to hear about things that went wrong as well.
Well, I think the things that really worked were often the smallest things. So our chief executive, Matt Prosser, and one of our executive directors, Aidan Dunn, used to do a short session in the morning, just catching up on what happened yesterday. But they'd styled it in the sense that they were both in their camper vans in a field. So there's a little bit of video of them. It was just very cleverly done. And it kind of added to the festival theme that they're actually in the middle of nowhere doing that. So those were my particular favorites, because they're very good at talking like that. To be honest, I didn't get to see a lot of stuff because it was my first week, and in between helping run or facilitate sessions, I was trying to meet people to help me do my job. So the great thing is, though, it's all still available. So if anyone wants to just Google Festival of the Future Dorset, all of the talks are up. And there are an awful lot of them. I think there is something like 60 up there. But we're looking to do some work soon on sort of curating the don't miss aspects of the festival. And there were many. And I think one of them was around helping people to get their hands on technology and use it that hadn't before.
Great.
I've heard people rave about that, but I haven't got to it myself yet.
Okay, well, if you pick up anything that you think might be useful for us to amplify on the show, we'd be delighted to hear about it. I mean, we've had our own experiences of online festivals in the time we've been on air with this show. Most recently, Sweyn and I were involved with a VCSS camp, which is the Conference for Infrastructure Organizations, where Sweyn kind of was the techie support for us using Kiko Chat, which was new to a lot of people in the sector. And he's happy to talk about that at any time. And also Sweyn was involved in the Orkney Science Festival.
That's right, yes.
I think sounds amazing. And, it just makes me want to go to Orkney, which I think is probably one of the aims. Sweyn, do you want to say a bit more about that?
The Science Festival, the Orkney International Science Festival, was the first days of September. And we realized early on that we weren't going to be able to have our normal bring 200 scientists to Orkney to give talks and lectures and have parties. So we put everything online using Zoom and YouTube. So it does. I sympathise with you on the Dorset festival front, Neil, because there's a certain point that comes when you almost can't believe that you're not actually inside the festival Zoom calls and not actually physically anywhere at all. But it was really good fun, and like you, we're trying to think of ways of you used the word curate, and that's a great word. I'm going to start using that one. The content that we've produced, because it's just a random normal year's output of that festival, but when you look at it, there's such a lot of good stuff there that we really need to bring it out and make it available to as many people as possible.
Yeah, that aspect touches on something I was pondering over the weekend as I typed up my week notes. I'm trying to do a week note for every week that I work in Dorset, and it was about I sort of subtitled it overdevelopment, because it was a particularly intense week last week in terms of trying to do training. I was actually missing some training sessions to do other training sessions. But there's now an expectation that that they're all available, they're online, but it doesn't help the part-time worker who couldn't be there in the first place because she's so stacked with work that she had to miss it. And I think the other thing is the amount of attention you're able to place, how much of yourself is in the session when you're not face to face with someone with eye contact. And I got caught out myself last week. I was in an induction session for the council, which was very well run and extremely engaging. But I had all those emails sat there I just wanted to look at the same time. So off went the camera and off went the microphone. The pop quiz caught me out and I got the lowest score of anyone. So I've learned that lesson. Shan't be doing that again.
Yeah.
No, I sympathise with that too, because I mean, when everything started to go online, suddenly everything was available to me.
Everything's available.
That just wasn't. I mean, normally I can go to maybe one or two things a year, and I've also had been so annoying for so many years about the need to make things more accessible, not just for whinging Scottish Islanders, as I always say, but also for people who can't travel for other reasons. That I decided I'd have to turn up to a fair few things that I'd been moaning on weren't accessible, and my record was to simultaneously attend 3 different events, one of which had subtitles, so that helped. I was engaged properly in another, but really, if they were watching who did what in the third event, I really wasn't there. So I had to kind of take stock and just, as you say, you need to. It's another prioritization type task that we've not had to do so far, and I think it does apply to everybody, because there's so many things available every single day, and the things that have gone from 1 day a year to 3 or 4 half days a year, that just multiplies a multiplying effect, because suddenly you've got a whole week of everything you've ever done all at the same time and all just theoretically there.
No, I think you're right, and the same goes for local gov camp this year, Pauline. I think I attended Gavin Beckett's keynote, and that was all I managed to make that week, because if it had been local gov camp, I would have been there in person, fully committed, and experiencing something that is a little different than just being in front of a screen where you can walk away any time. You almost have those incidental serendipitous conversations with people you wouldn't have met otherwise, and it's very difficult to simulate that.
I think that's really what the people who dream up and design events, that there needs to be a bit of proper thinking about that side of things as well. The in-between times, the coffee bars,
Yeah, we're thinking about that for the Data for Good festival. It's on next year in May, plug. DataKind is leading on that, and we're one of my business is one of the partners in it, along with lots of others. But they're thinking seriously about the networking side, because it is so, that's why on conferences were set up, weren't they, to have those water cooler chats in some ways,
Right.
or the nap camp, as Nick Booth is keen to promulgate. But yeah, it is important not to lose those. It's where you get those great ideas, isn't it? And why don't you do it like this? Or I'll do this, and let's talk about that. So we want to see more of that if we can keep some of that going. Yeah.
On the flip side, though, I guess for some people who aren't naturally outgoing, then the ability to be part of a conversation without being part of it is actually quite compelling.
Yeah.
So you can sit there quietly and not feel like you have to contribute like you would if you were there in person. So we may be opening some doors and closing others with these online events.
It's always that, isn't it? This new way of working has or could easily lead to really brilliant improvements in some forms of accessibility, but that will make things more difficult for other people. So it's always a balance.
We're kind of feeling that at the moment. So I have a team of 6 working for me, and I've never met them, which is kind of hard. And I think we're getting to the point now where we know each other okay, and that's kind of been done, and we're kind of plowing along with what we need to do, but we're really missing that contact thing. So I think Dorset took a decision early on with COVID that it wasn't letting anyone into the building en masse until next March. So they took that while I was still waiting to hear if I got the job. So I think it was kind of a brave move, but it set the parameters for what we needed to do next. But I'm really looking forward to the end of March now, even if it's just one day where a bunch of us get together.
This is quite interesting, because although there are people locally in my own area that I work with, I'm perfectly used to collaborating with people in this way. Pauline, we still can't decide whether we've actually ever met in the past. I don't think we have. But I must say that I find myself completely comfortable with being part of a distributed team like that. But I don't know whether that's just a peculiarity of there being bits of sea between me and most other people, or whether it just reflects a different way of looking at the world, that some people are more like that than others. I suspect it's a bit of both.
I think that necessity does push it out. I was doing for round 1 of the MHCLG digital projects, I did one on chatbots and AI, and the number of people that were interested was quite large in terms of the council. So the participation, I think it spanned 7 regions in the end when we looked at the map, which was quite something. So there was no way, if we had one rule, that we'd all get together on the first day, the kickoff in Birmingham, so everyone could get to it, but not everyone did. 2 people couldn't make it. But from then on, it was all remote, and that was I think it was a fairly successful project that worked okay, but it had to be by necessity done like this rather than in person.
Yeah,
I mean, we've been involved in Highlands and Islands wide projects for decades now, literally decades, going right back to the 90s, where it's precisely the model that you've just suggested, and that's just within the Highlands and Islands, because the distances there are so enormous. Just before you start to include anybody else in Scotland, and we've used these kind of digital video, audio technologies for a very long time, and we've been really keen to see others start to use them. So we're kind of it's a huge silver lining for us. But it's not just for us, it's for a whole set of people who have needed something like this to happen, but probably haven't been able to articulate what it actually was, even in some cases.
I remember when I was a kid hearing about children in Australia, taking part in school lessons by radio, and I thought this was amazing, and that I would never be a part of that. And now, lots of things I learn online and meetings and all on this show, it's all done online, and it's just people are just taking for granted, and people are taking part because they have to. And we do refer to this from time to time. They have to, not because they want to. It's so we need to find ways of making it more human for people. And I think we managed to do that. And John certainly was very human in his approach. We've had shows with John where he was kind of tuning in from like hospital and his bed and stuff like that. So we have made it so that we're not trying to we're trying to make people feel included, that they can take part in wherever they are, and hope we can manage to keep that going.
I never miss an opportunity to mention the University of the Highlands and Islands, which became a university sometime in the early 2000s. And it's a federation of what were further education colleges around the Highlands and Islands. And in something like 2013, they do all of their teaching in a video blended enabled way and have done from the very beginning. You can be a student in any subject anywhere, certainly in the area, and nowadays anywhere in the world. And it's like the Open University almost, but it's more personal than that. And in 1 year, in 2013, I think they had worked out that they had facilitated 10,000 3 or more person video calls for teaching purposes in 1 year.
Wow.
And that they don't even bother to count the point-to-point calls because they just happened. And that was all supported, even back then, by one guy with an assistant and a part-time admin who was based in Shetland. So the whole of this network was facilitated, managed across, a lot more than half of the area of Scotland in a way that was just done. And it kind of has always made me feel that there are fewer kind of technical and governance type issues over this sort of stuff than there are just willingness to give it a go.
Yeah. So Neil, we're going to be covering a few more things towards the end of the show, as we're coming towards the end now. Is there anything you have, a tool you've used since lockdown that's kind of new to you, or something that you rely on that the people might not have heard about? It's just helpful. We talk about new communication things from time to time. So if there's anything you can recommend for people, we'd be interested to hear.
So we've had a play with Miro a little, which is used by our service design team. So that was a little new to me, but it's also been used on some of these upstart conferences that are happening. There's some nice informal things happening around service design as well, which does allow everyone to get in the room. So that I found that to be really interesting. But as regards other toys, not so much. One thing I'm trying to push locally is using Hotjar because if you can't get people in a room to observe what they're doing, we can at least watch what they do online with all the cookies and permissions, obviously, and confidentiality, GDPR, blah. But it does allow you to see how people interact with a bit of tech far more than just looking at analytics and saying, well, 70 people looked at this page. You can see what kind of an issue they had. So I'm a big advocate, and I'm surprised not a lot of people had heard of it locally. So we're going to try and build that in, I think, because it does have a great deal of value.
Can you just say a bit for people who are listening who might not know what Hotjar is? Could you just explain a little bit what it is?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good point. Thanks, Pauline. So it essentially, well, there it is. What could be better than actually seeing what they say it is? You can actually see people interact with the screens that you put in front of them. You can choose which pages they trigger recordings on. You can run heat maps. You can run polls. I did show it to one of our social care team. We've got a separate adult social care website, so we've just implemented it on there. And I think what shocked them is the whole interaction only took 30 seconds and they were gone. And there's an expectation that people perhaps spend lots and lots of time looking at this beautifully written content and these wonderful images, but actually the truth is something else. And there's a nice carousel at the bottom. I don't often use those two words together, nice and carousel, but the positioning on the page and the research tells us that and the Hotjar heat map says there are so few people looking at this, you may as well not bother. So it allows us to have conversations with our colleagues in the services around data and around fact that goes just beyond personal intuition or, well, I like this, so it should work. So yeah, it helps conversations really.
Good. And Neil, you'll know that the National Data Strategy is out to consultation and is closing on the 2nd of December. Have you had a chance to take part in that at all, or has it?
I haven't. I feel I've been living that vicariously through Rachel Caldicott.
Yeah.
And my Gaia Marcus as well.
Mhm.
I have to say data's not a big part of my role currently here, so it's something I've let slip. I've still got a lot of passion for open data and doing more with that. So I've not been involved in that at all, no.
Okay, well, I'll just, while we have the opportunity, give a shout out for Rachel Caldicott's work, especially because she's looking at question 3 on the strategy, which is a response, and she's trying to encourage lots of people from civil society to respond because it's directly affecting people with protected characteristics, and she's encouraging people to just to sign up to her submission, which is really well written. We had her in the Midlands at the West Midlands Open Data Forum, her and Dr. Millie Zametta from the ODI talking about the National Data Strategy, and we're hoping to make a submission ourselves. So if people haven't had a look even, then I'd recommend that, because it, as Rachel says, this is going to affect all of us. Decisions are going to be made based on this strategy about data and how our resources. So, we need to be involved even at this late stage. Okay, Neil, you're very welcome to stay with us while we kind of see out the show, or you may have to go. Which is it?
I'm going to have to leave, I'm afraid, but it's been really great talking to you both.
Thank you very much.
Nice to experience a bit of Orkney from down here in Oxford.
If people want to get in touch with you, Neil, what's the best way for them to contact you following this show?
I don't really know. I suppose I could give my email address out.
Or Twitter, possibly.
Or Twitter?
Oh, Twitter is the easiest way. Yeah. So I'm still at OX1 Digital, and probably will be, actually. I should change it if I move from Oxford, but OX1 Digital is where I live. I'm usually in the British sphere most times, and yeah, get hold of me that way.
Great.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Neil.
Thanks very much, Neil. Really appreciate your time. Yeah, see you again.
Thanks, then. Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, a lot for us to take in there.
Yes.
Really nice to have somebody who's going from a quite an urban environment, I suppose, in Oxford to Dorset, and someone who has such passion for working with the community and stuff. He sounds like a re-baptism of fire going into that festival.
Yes.
But I think he probably embraced it, some of the sound of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't think we're going to be able to cover all the stories that we had lined up.
We've only got 5 minutes left.
Yeah. So I can pick out one or two, Sweyn.
Yes,
Are
go
you
ahead.
happy? Yeah. Okay. So there was one about the ranking the 100 most influential tech companies on digital inclusion, which is launching tomorrow. So I wanted to have that bring that to people's attention. That was from worldbenchmarkingalliance.org. And on the Tuesday and Wednesday, they're unveiling the first ever corporate digital inclusion benchmark. And this is about the 100 most influential digital technology companies who are leaders or laggards in improving access to technology, enhancing digital skills, fostering trustworthy use, and innovating openly and ethically. And they're inviting people to attend any of their launch sessions. So they're pointing out, obviously, as we know, that the pandemic has highlighted the consequences of digital exclusion on health outcomes, education, and incomes, demonstrating the many ways the growing digital divide is hindering the achievement of sustainable development. And these companies have an outsized role, given their command of capital and technological expertise and their ownership of digital infrastructure across the world, from data centers and submarine cables to the platforms that have become indispensable to daily life. So as I say, they're doing this launch tomorrow, and it's in the UK. It'll be at 5 o'clock tomorrow, where they're ranking the 100 most influential tech companies on digital inclusion. And this has been co-hosted with the UN Foundation. And they're convening individuals working to transform the digital sector from North and Latin America, Europe and Africa, and featuring special remarks from the UN Undersecretary General Fabrizio Hochschild. So I think anyone who's interested in digital inclusion will be interested to see what they've got to say about that.
If you could just say that the website for that, because I can't seem to find it.
Yeah, it's let me see if I can bring it up and share it with people. It's worldbenchmarkingalliance.org. Let me see. Yeah, I've got it there.
I've got it now.
So there it is. Yeah. Oh, you have. Okay.
That's the thing. Yeah. No, I missed that one.
So yeah,
looks a very good project.
Yeah. we do look at things that are happening outside of the UK here, because we recognise that we can learn from each other. So yeah, that looks like a good one there. And what else did I see? There was one. I think there was other date sensitive ones. There was one about research. Recognizing that COVID-19 participatory action research as an emergency response, and this is from the Centre for Culture, Sport and Events, School of Business and Creative Industries at the University of West of Scotland. The writer is Irene Warner-McIntosh.
Oh,
And she basically is saying the ability to use the internet has literally become a matter of life and death. So I think that's not under representing the situation. She acknowledges that research is always linked digital and health inequalities. The emerging literature on COVID highlights how this has played out, and considers the importance of the internet in terms of managing the pandemic, such as the dissemination of critical information at scale, public health measures such as contact tracing, e-health, and virtual medical appointments. And Van Dersen, who's one of the authors of one of those papers, notes that people who are already relatively advantaged are more likely to use the information and communication opportunities provided by the internet to their benefit in the health pandemic, which is fine if you've got material wealth, social capital, and the ability to access healthcare, but not if you haven't. So, we need digital citizenship basically to keep each other alive. So I think that's something we can willingly subscribe to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's probably all we've got time for this time, Sweyn. Yeah.
Yes.
So thanks everybody for listening. Please,
that's been very interesting.
Keep listening to and listening to the Dr. Tech Show and Tech Talk on Hope Radio in South Birmingham. And we hope you stay well and stay connected. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sweyn.